First of all, like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the algorithm. I found this article completely cool. I thought it was interesting because I had reviewed the comic they referred to a few days ago. This deals with the one of the stupidest things I've ever seen in a film that wasn't purposely made to be a bad movie. I think in a few years' time, people are going to look back on The Last Jedi and going to watch it in a Mystery Science Theater 3000 manner. It's not going to be taken... Well, it'll probably just be forgotten, even though it made quite a bit of money. The Holdo maneuver. We all know the Holdo maneuver, because if you saw that, you probably thought it was okay for about 5 seconds, and then you started to scratch your head and say, wait a minute, why didn't they use this before? Or like a robot or something? Let's take a look at this. The eye-rolling Holdo maneuver had fans asking many questions. Yes, why did I pay $10 to watch this movie? That's the question that most people asked. If the Holdo maneuver was a thing, then why wasn't it done before, particularly on the Death Star? No doubt. Why doesn't it have autopilot? Come on, you're in Star Wars. You've got technology to make ships that can fly across the universe. Of course it has autopilot. Of course it does. I mean, come on. Come on, this is just the dumbest thing. Just so dumb. So dumb. If autopilot was not available, why would it? We have cars that drive themselves. Airplanes fly themselves. Airplanes can take off and land by themselves. Of course, autopilot is available. Okay, if you don't have autopilot, why don't you have a drone pilot the ship? Why don't you have a little R2 or C-3PO type robot do it? Because the writer has Down syndrome. Why would a ragtag resistance with limited resources waste one of its most heavily armed ships? That's a good question. Why don't you use a smaller ship? Let me tell you the equation for talking about energy released upon impact. It's mv squared. Mass times velocity squared. And that square is the very, very important thing, because that tells you, and that's an expression, mv squared. Oh, come on, dog. That square tells you that the velocity is much, much more important than the m, because the m is not doesn't have an exponent. If you can accelerate, you're talking about something accelerated to light speed, or say even 99% of light speed. Keep it in the realm of the possible. The energy released as velocity increases, well, it increases according to the square. You can do the math yourself. It's the thing. It has to be, if it's in kilograms, then it's probably kilometers per second, and if it's in grams, it's probably in meters per second, I believe. But you have to look it up. You can look that up. It's been a long time since physics. My point is, if you can accelerate something to light speed or just below light speed, you could accelerate baseballs. I mean, something the mass of a baseball. Something, okay, say the single fighter jet. If you accelerated that to light speed, it would have the energy to destroy an appreciable part of even the Death Star itself. That's how big light speed is, if I remember right. It is 300,000, it's slightly below 300,000 kilometers per second. 186,000 miles per second, something like 299,000 kilometers per second. That is such a tremendous number that if you attach, and then you square it, that means you times it by itself, 300,000 times 300,000, and then you times it by the mass. The point is that the mass can be insignificant because the velocity is so high. Anyway. One of the earliest explanations for this silliness, oh, I love this writer, was that the Holdo maneuver had been outlawed by some galactic Geneva convention and therefore only rarely used. Fathead explains. Fathead has this to say. First of all, has this been done before? Period. I've got to reserve the right for Pablo Hidalgo to build it back into canon. If he is like, yeah, this is a thing. And so, wait, you're telling me that Fathead has no idea has no idea about the lore of Star Wars. I'm sure he's seen the movies, but has he read any of the books? Has he even seen the movies? Hey, fathead. Hey, fathead. Open a book. Read some Star Wars books. A lot of them are very, very good. So I had to ask another idiot called Pablo to build it back into canon if he's like, yeah, this is a thing. You don't even care. You don't even care. You just don't give a rat's ass about the movie, and you... Oh, stop. Dog walks right in front of the camera, and she just stays there. She just stands there. What a jackass. Okay, so Fathead and some Pablo idiot. Yeah, this is a thing, and they outlawed it. Do they have their heads in each other's asses? Is that how it works? I think there's various ways you can go with it if you're legally retarded, but it's not like it was the plan to do this. It's a spur of the moment thing. It's this idea that she gets, and she sits down and effing does it, and it obviously takes everyone completely by surprise. It takes Hux by it takes to anyone who has any familiarity with reason and logic by surprise. You don't even have to be familiar with Star Wars. You can simply watch this film cold with no experience whatsoever and say, oh, well, if this is a thing, why didn't they do it before? Why don't they do it all the time? Why don't you just use missiles, guided missiles, and accelerate them to light speed or hyperspace, whatever they call it? I mean, a child would start asking these questions. This explanation is not an explanation. It's just something low IQ people say. Pablo Hidalgo and Rian Fathead Johnson have room temperature IQs. It's this idea that she gets, and she just effing does it. It takes Hux by surprise. Is Hux the stupid man in the film? I think so. That movie was so forgettable. I'm forgetting the characters' names. The fact that Hux doesn't see it coming means it's probably not a standard military maneuver. Or it's illogical. I think it was something that Holdo pulled out of her butt in the moment. Then why didn't other generals or admirals use the maneuver? This, of course, begs the question, why would an inherently law-breaking rebellion worry about breaking some Geneva Convention? Yeah, that seems like an obvious point. Particularly when the bad guys are going around blowing up planets. Yeah, with terrorists, the rules are off. There are no rules when dealing with terrorists. You can do whatever the hell you want because they're terrorists. If you fly airplanes into buildings or blow up planets, then, you know, you're going to get objects shoved up your rectum at light speed. Why isn't it used all the time? It's arguably the most overpowered weapon in the galaxy. Yeah, MV squared, velocity squared. Especially since it only uses a ship, and that can be built from scrap, and a hyperdrive. Yeah, you have any kind of ship and have some stupid robot fly it. It's even crazier when you realize fleet-killing ships don't even have to cost the lives of pilots, because you could use droids to simply push the button and take out anything. Yet it seems that no one has ever thought of this in a galaxy that has had space travel for thousands of years. Yeah, excellent points. Hyperspace jumps in the Star Wars universe, generally understood to use, okay, whatever. FTL, alternative dimensions, it doesn't matter. Even if you grant that in the extended canon, hyperspace traveling ships can be pulled out of hyperspace by sufficiently large gravitational anomalies, Snoke's ships wouldn't be anywhere near large enough to have a gravitational impact sufficient to make it comparable to planetary bodies. Of course not. Though it is, well, I mean, everything with mass has gravity. That's one of the properties of mass. But even a ship like the Snoke ship, it would have a tiny little bit of gravity. You can actually, there's a basic physics formula available online to tell you how much gravity it would have. As you have to estimate the mass, but I guarantee that there are Star Wars geeks out there who can estimate the mass of all these ships. Approximately, I would say, just approximate it to like an aircraft carrier or something, or maybe, yeah, probably an aircraft carrier. And you could probably very reasonably estimate the mass within order of magnitude. There's no acceleration, high hyperspace. Okay. So we all know and love the stars turning to lines every time the Falcon jumps. Okay, here's the thing about this willing suspension of disbelief. We're willing to suspend our disbelief for a lot of things. The light speed travel. Okay, light speed's almost certainly impossible, probably. But to make a good movie in a universe that's in an area wider than a simple solar system, because even in our solar system, speed of light takes minutes to travel from planet to planet, and it would take hours to travel to the outer planets. So the movie would be very, very boring if you didn't have FTL. So we get it. You can shade the truth some ways, but you can't do things. You have to be logically consistent within the universe you've created. If everyone has FTL, fine. Everyone has the same tools available. When you have the Holdo maneuver, it immediately begs the question, why didn't you do it before? And it begs all these other questions. Why didn't you use robots? Why didn't you use all this other kind of stuff? That is the worst type of writing. Regardless, it now appears that the notion of the Holdo maneuver being outlawed is now going to be retconned, but it had never been made canon before. Here's some panels from the prequel comic book, Star Wars Age of Resistance. This is a comic book I reviewed, like I said, a few days ago in the review. It has 3 stories in it, and this is the one story out of the 3 that I actually took a look at, because it's written by, I believe I remember right, written by G. Willow Wilson. And she is, I showed you her TEDx talk on YouTube. She is so full of herself. Such a smarmy person. Anyway, this shows them escaping from using their small craft to escape from the large craft that has them in tractor beam simply by firing at it and blowing out the backside of the hole with these what looks like very small underpowered laser cannons are able to create a hole in this armored starship. It's pretty stupid. So if the rebel blockade runner could just fly right through a Star Destroyer completely unscathed, then why couldn't there? I'm sure when G. Willow Wilson came up with this idea, she thought she was such a clever girl. I'm going to subvert the hell out of these expectations. So if it could do this, then why couldn't the Resistance cruiser Radius fly right through the First Order Dreadnought Supremacy equally unscathed, or at least with minimal damage? Because writers are idiots. Amusingly, a Doctor Who Twitter account thinks this makes Holdo a smarter Princess Leia. To even compare the original Princess Leia with anyone in this cancer that is Star Wars now. Rest in peace, Princess Leia. One woman's airheadedness is another woman's smartness. You can watch this video. It'll explain the Holdo maneuver, which does not have any explanation. Baka, father of the Wookiee named Chewbacca, who lives with my wife in the city of Rokroro on the planet Kashyyyk. Actually, I read a Star Wars book that dealt with when Han Solo and the Wookiee go home to visit. It was kind of cool. Just a very old Star Wars fan who's probably brokenhearted at watching the crap they came out with. And what makes it worse is that The Force Awakens wasn't great, but it had potential, and it wasn't great, but people watched it and thought, oh, well, I hope the second movie kind of fixes it and kind of clears things up a little bit. And that's why people saw The Last Jedi. Well, The Force Awakens made, I think, $2 billion, and The Last Jedi made about $1.2 billion, so it made $800 million less, which is a hell of a loss. The second movie should have done equal or better. It didn't, because it had the Holdo maneuver. It had Holdo and this female crew treating the male members of the crew like they were just babies. They had the men acting like idiots. That's not the way military officers act. That Hux guy, I think, he was the one who had the interaction with Holdo. Well, Hux is the captain of... Well, he's captain of his ship, but he's also in command of, probably an air wing. So he's in command of several ships. So he's not just an enlisted man. He's an intelligent officer. Holdo just was so far from the appearance of command. What is important in the military? Communication, giving clear orders, and when taking orders and giving orders, and being clear, being able to communicate. She has no skill at that. You look at her, you see this purple-haired social justice warrior in an evening gown. Everyone else is in military garb, so what does that mean? She's a civilian leader? Why wouldn't you have someone more experienced? I mean, there's so much more on Holdo, why Holdo is an illogical choice, but a lot of it's not politically correct, dealing with why women don't go in the military in the first place, because usually women want to have babies and they don't want to get involved in a job that puts them in a high-risk field where they can't have babies. And anyway, there's more to it than that, but it's just so on PC that no one can mention it. Anyway, like I said, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next episode.